All right, so welcome to our second Write It Now Judgment. Now, we did not do this last time, but we are hopeful that this will be a fun and engaging way to sort of do the judging. We have not yet spoken about these stories, but here we're going to discuss them, sort of pick apart what we like most, what we want sort of as our winners. There will indeed be a first, second, and third place award. By the way, I am Chili. Does everyone else want to introduce themselves?
I'm Quo Pro Quid, the second judge.
And I'm Beezus, the third judge.
These two lovely judges who are joining me came in first and second in the last competition, which is why I recruited them to help me out judging this time around. Before we get started with the stories, I just want to give a shout out to Thunderdome, which we've all written for. If you enjoyed this at all, it might be more fun and maybe even a little less stressful to do this with a whole week as opposed to 2 hours. So head on over there. There's a prompt every week, and people just generally write good stories, sometimes less good stories, but regardless, you'll grow from the process. So head over there if this was at all interesting or fun to you. So with that said, let's get this going. So let's start with these stories. We're going to go through them quickly, and we will just render a verdict at the end. So our first one was an Utter Predicament. I'm going to take the summary on this one. I'll say it was cute. I do indeed like the idea of, why not have these characters be otters? Why not have them, wagering with clams? Beyond that, the story kind of does indeed struggle a bit. First and foremost, let's go with like the easiest thing to make the story better. Give your protagonist a name that gets us at least somewhat bought into who they are, what they're all about. If you name even a rock Stanley and then you throw it away, people get sad because now the rock is not just a rock, it's Stanley. So that helps. Generally speaking, what I struggle with in this story was that we kind of get bogged down in the mire of the technicalities of the gambling and the dynamics therein. And it's a little hard to follow. My guess is you had a very clear, and by the way, we don't know who wrote these yet, so we're not speaking to anyone specifically, but you, the author, had a clear concept of what was going on that I don't think the readers themselves would possibly be able to ascertain. Made it kind of difficult to follow the exact beats. Like I think we get it, the otter is sort of gambling a bunch of stuff, but you focused a lot more on how all that's working, and it was a little hard for me to buy in. You guys have anything to say or add?
Yeah, I'll echo what Chili said. This is a little vignette about a card game between some talking otters, or a talking otter, and the admiral. It's functional largely for the first bit of it, but I thought there was a bit of problems when it gets into sort of the card game technobabble, if you want to call it that. And as Chili said, I really think that character names are important, and just providing some additional context into the card game might have been beneficial in helping me as a reader understand this.
To be the third voice that echoes that this was a cute premise. That was the first line of my notes. And I think with a story like that, with a premise that's so cute, I think initially, and at least for me, like I'm kind of on board from the get-go, but as a reader, need a little bit of assistance. Names would have helped, I think, create some or to provide better clarity throughout the story, because things did get a little bit muddled. This was also a story where I would have liked to have seen another pass of the dialogue. I found it a little difficult to follow at times, and I don't think it was helped by some of the technicalities of like the game. But I think that additional level of clarity might have helped make it flow a little bit better. But otherwise, yeah, I'm on board for otters. I love otters, but it just wasn't quite there for me.
All right, cool. So on to the next one. QPQ, you want to take it away with one of many bluffs of the week?
I would love to take it away with the one of many bluffs. So this first bluff story is about Reynold and Candace, who are these Old West bandits who are stealing something called the Cat's Paw Diamond, I believe, from some Confederate deserters. And their whole relationship is sort of I don't know if love hate's the correct terminology, but it's definitely antagonistic, in which they're passionate, and then they betray one another, and then they're passionate again, and they steal the diamond, and then they have the standoff where one of them tries to take the diamond from the other, only for at the very last minute a vulture to swoop in and steal the diamonds, sort of Looney Tunes style, and that sort of ends with them, going like, you know what the real treasure was? It was one another, and they embrace and kiss and do all that sappy stuff. Um, my general take on this was that I I enjoyed bits of it. I thought that the relationship between Candace and the dude were quite nice. It's a little dialogue could have used another passover, I think, and there were some. I think that you probably could have cut like the first 5 paragraphs of the story, honestly, and lost very little. But the core dynamic, I think, is strong, and something that I think an additional edit, if you wanted to develop this, could be a real core of a good story. There's also some nice imagery here about Viper grins, and I'm not a huge fan of the vulture swooping at last minute and resolving the conflict, but maybe that's just me. Maybe there's some sort of zany logic to it, but that was my take. The too long didn't read version, dynamic strong, rest of stuff needs another edit.
What say you, Bees? This is QPQ alone in that sentiment.
Yes and no. I enjoyed this story. I actually found the beginning stronger than the end. And I was more engaged in the first few paragraphs. The argument I thought could have been punchier. I thought that was an opportunity that, while it was entertaining, I guess I was just left a little bit wanting. I was kind of ironic what actually happened to the cat's paw, but I was sort of wrestling with the enjoyment I had of these kind of Looney Tunes style antics, and the imagery was so strong for me, which I always appreciate. But just there were little points throughout the story. It was like, oh, if it could have done, X instead, or punched that up, I think it would have just been a little stronger and made a stronger impression. But overall, really enjoyable.
Yeah, I'll agree that this was by no means a chore to read. It was enjoyable. I didn't much care for the resolution of it. And, I guess I'll take exception and also admire the fact that this is like a married couple. I kind of like it. Definitely wasn't what I was expecting, but I think it doesn't really work for that kind of reason. Like, I don't get it. Are they a team or aren't they a team? Does it really matter who actually gets the thing or doesn't it? And, to me, this could have sort of worked better if they just were divorced. And then, yeah, it's not as like funny, but if they were, that. And now, okay, they're like, they're like super into just like, lusting after each other. I could believe this a little bit more, and I would sort of be a little bit more on board. As it is, I just don't get it. I don't like, are they not agreeing to like work this shit out? Like, just take the thing, run, split it. I don't get it. I mean, I guess, I don't know. I don't get a lot of it, but I understand the idea of going for it. So fun enough to read, but yeah, that's kind of where it landed for me.
I took it as very Katy Perry, and you're hot and you're cold, you're yes and you're no, you're in and you're out.
Indeed.
I will say, I also went back and forth with the ending. There was a moment where it's like, oh, that's kind of funny. They were about ready to kill each other over this. And then as soon as a bird takes it, oh, it's fine and I love you. And then wait a minute. They were about to kill each other over this. All of a sudden it's fine and I love you.
Yeah.
So there's a couple ways to look at it.
Yeah. Some time in the editing chamber, which, obviously you don't have very much of in a contest like this. And who knows where the story could have gone, but we can say that about many of these. So let's move along to a bit more of a morose affair, and We Will Not Be Okay. And I think, Beezus, you're going to lead us off on this one.
I'd be happy to. So this is a tale of two strangers on a train. And it's also a cautionary tale. While if someone asks you to hold on to a bag when you're traveling, say no. This is, and I'm having this is going to take me a second to explain, because this is a strange story. A traveler is asked to hold onto a package by this old man. He apparently makes the mistake of looking into it. We don't really know what he sees, but it's something kind of phenomenal, maybe terrible, but it leads to a chain reaction of these sort of, I don't know what to call it, metaphysical, cosmic happenings that are kind of horrible. And then I don't know. Feel free to jump in if you're losing me. But I'm like,
No,
what does happen?
I wouldn't enjoy being in your position either, because I couldn't really follow this. And that isn't to say I didn't like it. I did.
Oh, I really liked it. That's
yeah.
why I feel bad.
Yeah, no, but it is kind of one of those stories where it's a little hard to sort of pin down. The clarity did kind of leave for a bit of wanting, but I thought just the idea of the train being like suspended amidst all this other stuff. And I also just love the idea of sort of this like ennui Ponzi scheme of like, well, now it's on to you. You have to deal with this shit now. Go find someone else to pawn it off on.
It's like an eldritch hot potato.
Yeah.
And
yeah. I
was
likened it
super into
to
that.
the movie It Follows, which I don't know if this person has seen, but like check that out if you haven't, because it kind of feels similar. But yeah, no, like it was kind of hard to pin down exactly what I liked, but I did like it because it hit hard. But it's sort of one of those stories that's hard to define exactly how.
I think it was helped by, in that it was carried by, I think, some really strong language, just very nice prose. It really stood out to me, which I think helps alleviate the fact that we're not getting some answers. And rather than me like continue to ask that question, I'm like, I'm okay with not knowing.
Yeah, no, I want to echo that. I thought that this gave me real Welcome to Night Vale vibes. If you're familiar with the podcast, in which there is often you have a sort of quaint setting, and then there's odd things that happen in that setting that are never sort of explained or rationalized in any way. And part of the joy is that lack of explanation. I did really, I just, to echo what Beezus and Chili said, I really thought that some of the prose here was really quite strong about, passengers' bodies twisting into taffy, and sort of the descriptions of the hand toward the end. But to me, it felt like there wasn't really a there. It was just at times weirdness for weirdness sake, which I think is quite fine. And honestly, I do this as a writer too sometimes. But I think to push this up over the edge, I needed some sort of underlying idea or underlying theme to sort of unite these, to make sense of this weird bag, this weird Ponzi scheme bag that gets hoisted upon the narrator.
Yeah, so I think it's clear that like there are strong feelings about this, and do bear in mind for whoever's listening here, there will be, crits and comments posted by all of us later in the thread with sort of a more extensive look into how we actually felt about these things. I know that it can be hard to sort of make it clear like how we feel about a story like this, but do we feel like we've done a level of justice?
I think so.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. All right, cool. So yeah, apologies for the brevity of this, but we do have quite a bit to do, and it's late where I am, and I have a toddler waking up in a few hours. So let's keep on going. Next up, we have The Base of the Bluff, a strong entry in my opinion. I would argue, and maybe I'll eat my words on this, but I think I rooted for this protagonist more than I rooted for almost anyone else in the stories that I read this week. There's a tough thing in stories like this of like, not really, you don't want to linger too much on the sort of, woe is me, I've got no life, I'm just gonna, I'm like worm food soon. But it didn't hang in there for too long. It got me sort of wanting this person to wake up and to begin, I believe, as the author phrased it, to steer. And the catharsis when that does happen felt really real. I was pulling for this to happen. I wanted something good to happen. I kind of struggled a bit with knowing exactly what was about to happen. And it seems like it's some kind of a wingsuit dive, which I got at the end, but in the middle, I couldn't quite tell what they were supposed to be doing, but that could just be my reading comprehension. Overall, though, it's an efficient piece. It, gets you bought into the character and hoping for the best quickly. And then, sometimes it's just okay for there to be good, solid, cathartic resolution. And that's okay sometimes. And the story worked for me in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think Chili might have seen my notes because I have almost literally the exact same sentiments in this.
Have not seen them, but that's good.
Yeah, no, it's a joke, which was not very funny, I'm realizing. This was my second highest rated story of this week. I really quite enjoyed the story as itself for the same reasons Chili outlined, of just this sort of dude trying to seize life. To avoid sort of just repeating what was just said, I think that if I was going to improve this, I might add some complexity to the dynamic between, I think it's Molly and Arthur, if if I remember correctly, the name. Oh, Emily. I'm
they're
sorry.
their sibling relationship, right? I think.
Yeah. Emily, I think in particular, strikes me as a little one note at points where she's just sort of like sort of a goofy sibling teasing kind of a thing. With her, power posing in a way to a big boy, actually, yeah, sorry, with her power posing and whatnot. But as it stands right now, I think it's functional. Sorry, I realized that I did not make a lot of sense there. I enjoyed the story. I would maybe do another passive edits on Emily to improve her a little bit, but otherwise I thought it was quite well done.
I think it was the outlier in my reaction to this. I thought the story was okay, but I ranked it more in the middle of the pack. For me, it was fine, but I think maybe the key difference for me was I wasn't immediately invested in Arthur. I didn't understand, or maybe I understood the picture of Arthur that was being painted before me, but I was not necessarily immediately on Arthur's side. And when Emily was introduced, I had the same reaction, QPQ. Kind of one note. So we get to our second character, and she didn't really add anything to it for me. So I think my level of investment stayed pretty low. And then Chili, like you said, wasn't quite clear what we were working up to, like what the action was. I should assume they were cliff diving or something. So just wasn't as on board with this journey. I thought there were some nice moments. I agree that I think another, line edit would probably help punch it up and maybe bump my score up on it a bit. But yeah, it was nice, but
fair take.
That's what I got.
That seems incredibly reasonable, and I can understand like just being affected a bit more by the negatives than the positives in that case. So that's fair. Cool. QPQ, do you want to take us to the behemoth of the contest?
Yeah, I'll take us to Behemoth and Bluff Part 2, the sequel. Unrelated to previous Bluff. So this is a story. It's a sci-fi story. We got Jocasta, who is running like a spaceship as a big important person, and she has a series of conversations, first with her robot assistant Grigori, over this vessel, this alien vessel that they're seeing toward the far side of the galaxy, and then with her daughter, who is worried about her going to war. And it's all building up to them actually seeing this alien vessel that they talk about for quite a bit before ultimately approaching said vessel. And then instead of firing on the vessel, they just sort of watch it and go, they'll fire their shots, and she sort of moves on with her life. I know that was not a good summary. Does anyone have
We had a lot of ground to cover. It's okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to be I don't want to be cruel about this piece. My large takeaway is that this is quite long, especially for a story written in 2 hours, and I think there are a lot of very interesting ideas that are conveyed here, and they're often conveyed quite clearly because I think that the sentence level, this is written quite well. But at times it sort of drags on. I'm thinking in particular about the long conversations between Jocasta and her assistant and her daughter and other characters that just seem to be talking about things they're going to be doing and don't really progress very quickly toward the actual goal. I think that when you're writing a piece, whether that be a piece of short fiction or something longer like a novel, you've got to be very aware of your pacing and aware of what is necessary and unnecessary to include. And so having this large amount of minutia about the specific ways in which to approach this alien object and whatnot, I think harm the overall direction of the story and make the ultimate conclusion not land as well, because we spent so much time and so much effort sort of building up to this thing by just talking about this thing, and ultimately having this very, very small, very short ending. That's not to say that, again, this is not without sort of its own redeeming qualities. Again, I think that the prose is quite functional and at times strong. It's just that it's quite long.
I have to echo, I think, a point you made, which is just the level of clarity throughout was really solid. And I was actually really pleased to see, for its length, that I was able to follow along what was happening without having to do too much work, which I think is commendable. But yeah, I thought there were parts that maybe could have been delivered a little more succinctly, like the conversations, while decently executed, probably could have been cut away to get us to some action a little bit faster. This was a story where I was really interested in how the author, if there was, how they started, because this is something where when we're trying to introduce some foreign concepts, like we're understanding, like there are new ship classes, there's some things we as readers need to know before we get into this. Like if we're thinking about our target length before we get in, because that is where all of a sudden the economy of space becomes so critical, and you really have to like sacrifice those beats that aren't getting your point home. And I think, there was no word limit here. I think this was, I'd like to read this again, but see how the author could do this, maybe like on a shorter scale, because I was interested in the character and what this world was introducing me to. But I think it took a little bit longer to get there than I was expecting. And yeah, just gonna let that thought die.
That's fair. I don't have a ton to add. It's, everything that y'all said is pretty much covered where I felt about this. Yeah, look, it's long, but hey, it is an accomplishment that I didn't get lost. But I didn't feel particularly bought in. I didn't care terribly about the characters and the outcomes or not. And that sort of was, I think, the biggest issue for me. Look, the plot was there and the story was there. It was just a lot of thing happen. And ultimately, in a contest like this, I have to sort of, you just got to know who's reading this story. The pledge we all made was to sort of get through a bunch of these stories really quickly and pass out a judgment. Like, we got to get something and feel bought in quickly. Otherwise, it's going to be kind of a glazed over quality, at least for me when I'm reading this. So, functionally, again, clearly the author has some chops and can sort of make things happen. And that's really good to see. So, I'd say to sort of focus a bit sort of on editing and getting us bought in a bit more early. And that's about it. So that takes us to drop. And I believe, Beezus, you are up.
Drop. Hold on.
This was the wizard thing.
So I might have to defer on to another summary, because this is a story where I wasn't confident that I understood what was happening.
That's
So
a
if
valid
anyone else
criticism. Well,
do
that's a
that.
valid criticism in its of itself. I'll piggyback off that and say I agree. Where it stood out for me, because we have a little spreadsheet that we're working out of, is I didn't follow much of it, but this sort of felt like a vibe. The story kind of felt like it really did kind of just explode from the author's sort of psyche in all of the best and worst ways. Like, it just kind of had a feeling. This is the type of story that will just stick with me and will make me think about some of the images within it. Couldn't really tell you much about what actually happened in it. Couldn't really tell you quite what was going on and throughout a lot of it, but the prose worked for me. It felt like it was just teetering to purple, but it never quite got there. It was sort of just resonant. So it's a hard piece to talk about, at least for me. So I feel that, but I kind of dug it, if that makes sense.
I'm with you on the note about pieces of it being memorable, because the second you even mentioned like it's the wizard hat story, I was like, I know exactly what you're talking about, because that line made me laugh like
Mhm.
out loud, which for me, whenever that happens as I'm reading these stories, it's like a major win point. And I will say I bought into this early. I was engaged and then just wasn't quite sure where we were going. And I find it personally for that loses me pretty quickly, and just kind of had a hard time trying re-engaging at points. But language was strong,
Mhm.
some solid visuals, but otherwise, as far as the overarching narrative, I was a little fuzzy on.
Yeah, totally. I mean, my understanding of the narrative is that the narrator's friend Taryn takes him to a cool mountain that's magic and makes him see and makes him fly and everything else. And I think a large parts of that, my really inelegant description aside, was actually, again, as you said, quite memorable. I think there are aspects of this and there are ideas in here that I think are really quite strong. But as has been said, the lack of clarity on what specifically is happening to who and to who, not even necessarily why, but is really a detriment to the story. I think that in addition to what has been said about just sort of clearing up sort of what is happening, like beat by beat action wise, I might also clear up what is going on with Taryn and the narrator a little bit and sort of their relationship. Just because the dynamics there are a little inscrutable, at least from my perspective. But again, there's a lot. I mean, this, as has been said, there's parts of the story that did stay with me. Like the ending in particular, for whatever reason, I remember very distinctly. So I think I would like to see this edited, if at all, just to see what the second version or the not 2-hour version of this looks like.
Reasonable. So I think we kind of covered that one. Cool. I'm realizing now that this Zoom meeting is only allowed to last for 10 minutes. So in the background, I'm going 10 more minutes. I'm going to be trying to figure that out. So bear with me. Real quick to cover the Bluffalo from my end of things. What we have here is a Pokedex entry. We do not have a story. Having said that, it is indeed an amusing read in parts, and I enjoyed parts of it. Parts of it fell flat, but these things aren't necessarily narratively connected or put together. There was an element of creativity that I did indeed appreciate, but let's see this Bluffalo out in the world. Let's have someone stumble upon the Bluffalo. I don't know what this is. I didn't hate it, but I don't really know what it is. So that's Chili's take on the Bluffalo.
Yeah, my comments on the story was, oh geez, the writer of this letter is going to turn out to be a Bluffalo, isn't he? I bet the writer is going to be a Bluffalo, and then they were the Bluffalo all along.
It could not be a
I guess
Bluffalo.
I
You would have
missed
been
that.
disappointed.
I might have even missed that. I don't quite know.
I mean, I thought this was a cute little piece. It's not really a story, and I think this, again, there's little things that maybe gave me little sensible chuckles, but there's not really a narrative here in a traditional sense, and it's not necessarily the most compelling thing. It's short, it's succinct, but it's just sort of it doesn't overstay its welcome, but there's not much there, at least from my perspective. So that's my take.
I had to rein in my feelings about the story because I initially was just a huge fan, but you're right, it isn't a story. There's no narrative. There are some nice haha moments. I think it was refreshingly brief. Like you said, didn't overstay its welcome. But yeah, it really is sort of like the odd story out in for the reasons we've discussed. But I can't help but like it, yet also know that it is missing what so many of the other entries have, but I can appreciate it for what it is on its own. But I kind of have to put it in its own little area and just admire it from a distance and then leave it alone. Otherwise, I'll go to bat for it, knowing full well that it's that I shouldn't.
Fair enough.
I love the Bluffaloes.
It's fair to love the Bluffalo. That's okay. It's okay to love the Bluffalo.
I
But
also love the
I'm
Bluffalo.
glad to hear that, because truth be told, guys, I am the Bluffalo. There
Oh
we
my
go.
God.
Okay. So now that mind collectively has been blown, I'm pleased to announce I've indeed extended this meeting's capacity so we can keep on going. Having
Miracle.
said that, QPQ, can you take us to Mustang Sally?
I would love to take us to Mustang Sally now that we've got additional time.
We do.
So Mustang Sally is about Captain Sally Ride, who is not the same as the historical figure Sally Ride, which I was a bit confused by at the start, but
Second.
nonetheless. So Sally Ride is the sole occupant of a mining ship that gets lost in space, proverbially. And as she's sort of drifting off into the abyss, she comes across an alien who is just sort of wacky. And Sally Ride asks the alien if he can please, or if they can please help her get back. And he does. And she subsequently arrives back on Earth, but no one really believes her about, her alien encounter. And it sort of puts a bad stain in everyone's mouth about, this long lost hero returning from so many years, until 30 years pass and the alien who Sally previously invited to Earth decides to pop in, and he's like, "Hey, Sally, how's it going?" And Sally's like, "Hey, it took you long enough. Was the trip long?" And he's like, "No, I just, was doing my own things." And then they go "Hey, let's have a big press conference so that I don't look like a moron who's been lying for my whole life anymore." So I think that was a summary. Let me know if I was incorrect in any of that characterization. But I thought there were some cute moments in here. I thought that I thought I enjoyed the overall concept of this astronaut who has this sort of incredible experience and no one quite believes them, and they're sort of left their whole life just sort of thinking about this. The thing that I did not quite enjoy about the story was the alien, who is he's got real big children's animated movie character energy, like real Olaf from Frozen kind of energy, just sort of wacky comic relief kind of a thing. And that's fine in small doses, but I really would have recommended reining it in a little bit and making sort of the comedic beats a little subtler so that it's not so in the reader's face. And I understand that part of it is supposed to be that he's an alien, or they're an alien, I'm sorry, and sort of the aggressiveness, if you want to call it that, of the alien sort of mannerisms is the source of the humor, but I would have toned it down just a skosh.
Jesus, your thoughts?
I think I agree with you on all counts. I enjoyed the story. I did find the juxtaposition of our astronaut and our alien to be kind of Space Jam in that disparity. I appreciated, though, that at least the author was consistent in how the alien communicated and kind of had a catchphrase in there. So I've got to give credit where credit's due. But I think I get hung up on the choice of the name for the main character, Sally Ride, who is a real person who I've just unfortunately happened to know a bit about. And that kind of stuck with me and kind of left this interrupting question, which is it supposed to be this? Is this are we doing some kind of alternate future history, or is just happenstance or a choice that really doesn't have any bearing on the story? But I do think is also a strong point in names matter. Not necessarily any, the choice of letters you use, but an existing person is going to may pull in pre-existing thoughts or feelings or perceptions of a character you might not want the reader to have. So just word of caution there. But otherwise, I like this. And I thought this actually was a story that had really strong beats throughout. I liked the ending. I liked the kind of like, well, you're here. This is what everyone has wanted, but I'm not going to give it to them because they've made my life hell. And I was just doing my job, which I found satisfying personally. But yeah, I would have liked to have seen that alien tone back a bit. This is one of those stories where I'd love to see a second pass, a revision. I think this could be really, this could be tightened up a bit and really be super solid. I was with it pretty much through the entirety, and was like glad to have read it when I was done.
Yeah, I think I can say the same for probably most of the stories, this one included. It was indeed a fun read. I think my criticism of it is actually kind of an inverse to what QPQ said. I actually wanted more of the alien, perhaps toned down. But to me, it's like the interesting thing that's happening here is a conversation between, and yeah, again, there's an issue here calling this character Sally Ride. But there's a conversation here happening between an alien and an astronaut. Like, that's the weird, cool thing. That's what we should have the story be about. The problem was it was a little bit kind of animated character over the top vibey thing. I'd rather see the majority of the story exist there, but toned down in such a way that that's more of what we're reading about, as opposed to some of the ruminations and the reflections thereafter. So, but otherwise, not bad, and I did enjoy it. Cool.
Yeah.
And next up we have Comings and Goings, and I've got this one tagged for you, Beezus.
Yeah, Comings and Goings. This was the story of Elisa, wasn't it? On her island with her mother.
Elisa and the Boyd.
And the Boyd. First there was Mother, then there was the Boyd. So we meet Elisa, who I'm assuming is alone on this island with her mother, who is not doing very well. It's clear very early her mother is sick. And it seems like Elisa's the only one who's there to care for her. And this is a pretty rudimentary or low technology kind of situation set up. She's preparing like an herbal tea. This is my takeaway. There's this sort of foreshadowing of, grave illness. And that does come to pass. Elisa's mother, basically in her dying breath, gives Elisa these last words about, regret, wish I could protect you, or I wish I could have. Am I getting that mixed up? My takeaway was that there was some regret. There was a parting message in that, like, I protected you as long as I could. I wish I could stay here longer. It's a touching scene. And then this transition happens and Elisa's alone on the island. And then comes face to face with a big bird that we initially think is here to attack Elisa or something's going on, but it becomes clear that that's not what's going on. This bird has some other motive, which is not murder. And as we realize this, there's this realization that the bird is maybe a friend. Elisa sees something in the distance on past the shore, out on the sea, which I think Elisa doesn't know this, but I think the reader's led to believe there's a ship coming. And Elisa does not recognize this. And there are some kind of parting words that Elisa hears, which I think it was just like a final, I love you, which I'm assuming, or no, she says it explicitly. It's in her mother's voice. So she hears her mother's voice this one last time as the ship appears, and that's where it fades to black. Yeah, I had major like Studio Ghibli vibes throughout this story, which I really enjoy. I thought there was kind of a serenity here, even though, the premise was pretty sad. And a subtle mystery that there's something about this bird. There was something about Elisa's mother that maybe wasn't quite, she wasn't what met the eye. My assumption was that she was the bird, or that there was a new form that she was going to assume, and that this was it. And that this boat was something she was being protected from. It was a story that I think maybe answered some questions with a little bit of work from the reader, which I do enjoy. getting to do that work, so long as I know I'm right. Not necessarily. I'm fine with being wrong. That's fun too. But yeah, I thought this was it had a nice flow. I would have liked to have seen, I think, a more I wanted a little more definition out of the ending, or a little more certainty. Might have just been preference. But yeah, I don't know. End thought.
To sort of echo some things there, I think the story had some strengths going for it in the intrigue department of like, what's going on here? And what is the truth that's sort of being covered up by the mother? Like, what's the thing that, you know, they clearly were holding back on? I like the intrigue. What I struggled with, and this is probably a personal thing, but stories that deal with grief are kind of my like big favorite thing to read when I'm feeling kind of in that place. And what I got from this story was a kind of shortcutted right through grief, and like mom dies and now we have this bird and all this mystery, and it's like we're not really dealing with how Elisa is feeling, it seems, from like this loss. It seems to be pretty profound, and I don't get much of that. I'm sort of more getting of like that intrigue element of like what's happening here and what was that truth, and those things are cool and I like them, but I kind of want to get a bit more of a cathartic feel of like what's actually going on here in her heart, I guess, if that makes sense. So that's kind of my takeaway.
No, I mean, I'll echo that. I thought that there could have been a lot more opportunities to define the relationship between the mother and the daughter, and to explore more fully the daughter's grief, understanding that this was a piece that was written in 2 hours, and that would have been probably extremely difficult to do something, you know, that complex and that sort of difficult. But I thought there was quite a bit that was nice about this piece. I thought that the sort of intrigue, I think as Chili described, was interesting, even though I think I would have liked more clarity on what specifically was happening. The piece on the bird reminded me of the old sailor's wives' tale, that seagulls contain the souls of people who died at sea. And I don't know, I think that the implication of the ending is that the bird is either the literal or the like a metaphorical like symbol of the daughter's mother, and that indeed the ship is coming and that there is a better future on the horizon. But as Chili said, I think that to really make that hit hard with the bird, you really want to make sure that the relationship is as well defined as it can be, and that includes bulking up sort of the first 2 sections, so that both the relationship before she gets sick and then the subsequent death are really impactful.
Cool. All right. All right, that's going to take us to what is this, bluff 3? The bluff 3.
The bluff.
Yeah.
Bluff the third.
Bluff the third. Okay, so what we have here is a very relatable, I'm sure I can imagine we've all been in this position. Our neighbors are making too much noise and we just want to say something, and it makes us feel like we're old and that we're yelling at the clouds. And yeah, we've all been here. So starting off with a relatable premise is a really good idea of like, we have this person who's being disturbed by a party, is trying to steal themselves. Really, the problem here though is that no one, I think, reading this story believes that there's even a shred of a chance that this person's ever going to get up there and knock on that door. And surprise, surprise, they don't. Here's the deal. You've got a story. It's fiction. You can do anything you want. If you want to have the outcome be as simple as that, then go wild with it. Like, get a little bit crazier. I have a problem with stories that feel very binary, and either this thing will happen or that thing will happen. And then that's what's going to happen. And that's kind of what happened. Like, the more boring option happened. The character didn't grow. They just kind of retreated into themselves and stayed the same. And like, okay, like, yeah, this is a very accurate picture of what goes on in most apartment buildings, but I don't need to read an experience that I've lived too many times, that many people have lived too many times, without something special to be brought to it. So it read as earnest, it read as genuine, but that's about all it kind of had going for it. Like, again, you're entering the world of fiction. Go hog wild, have fun with it, do something special or different, because like this didn't really pop for me.
Yeah, I appreciated this accurate real life depiction of my hashtag New York lifestyle, where everyone's living on top of each other and is deeply aware of all the noise that is happening around them. But I think, like Chili said, the problem is that this whole story takes place in the narrator's head as they're desperately trying to sleep. And the longer the story goes on, the more aware that the reader becomes that there's no actual confrontation going to be here. There's no actual resolution. It's just going to be one, effectively a monologue happening in the narrator's head. And that's not, you know, internal monologues are not necessarily a bad thing. There are some aspects of this piece that, speak true, and there are some sort of more comedic elements that I think that manifest in the paragraphs that we have here. But, and I hate to keep saying to echo Chili, this really needed some sort of action in it. So, you don't have to have the person just sort of lay there and take it. Do the interesting thing in fiction of having them confront the person or have something bizarre or deranged happen. I don't know, they find a bag with like a galaxy in it or something, and to go back to the last story, I don't know.
Yeah, well, the thing I put in my notes, and I stand kind of by it, is like, well, why not have like the party above them get so raucous and crazy that the ceiling falls above the person and they get crushed to death because they never stood up and did something? Like, it can even be the outcome, right? Like,
yeah, like,
or your upstairs neighbors are werewolves and we don't know that till
there you go,
way
right?
late. Just yeah, I agree with all of your points. For me, I think, Julie, to your point, like this is relatable content. We've been there, but because it's a relatable real world situation, we kind of all sort of know like what we would do and what's going to happen, which is we're not going to do anything about it, but we're going to feel some feelings very intensely. And I think breaking away from that expected outcome, as with these examples you've described, to do exactly, you don't have to use a paper bag with a galaxy inside it, but just in that vein, there are a lot of options. It didn't even need to be just something maybe unexpected or different. I think that would have helped offset the lack of action, but I also would have liked to seen what it might have felt like with action throughout, just a little bit more movement or sense that we were going somewhere. I definitely thought this was a believable kind of stream of consciousness. I followed the thought process very well. Just wanted something different to happen.
I think we're all kind of lockstep on that one. So let's move on to Edge of Everything and QPQ. You're going to take care of this one for us from the beginning.
I would be delighted. I thought this was quite an endearing story about a young child who is having sort of imaginations, who's imagining different things about himself and the world around him while playing with their family. So first, they're being tossed around in the water by their father, and they're the rainbow fish. And then, they're fighting off bad guys in their cottage, and then they go and they run off and they combat all the aliens, and they're fighting for years on months or whatever, even though it's actually probably like just a few seconds in the mind of this child. As I said before, I thought this was really quite cute. It's a really sweet story. It's not necessarily problems, but I think the issues with it, I think, stem from some awkwardness in the prose. So some of the sentences themselves are a little need sort of another pass of editing, or just need a little more practice on behalf of the writer, which again will come easier as you write more. And the others is just that at times, and this was just on my first and second read through of this, some of the transitions between the imaginary and sort of the real are a little hard to pick out. I think in particular when he's fighting the aliens, I had to go back and be like, wait, what? Before I realized like, oh, this is wholly happening in this kid's head. And I think that's clearly the intent after having read this a couple times, with just sort of doing that first pass through. I got a little confused, but overall, quite a lovely little thing.
Yeah, Did you read my notes? Because no, this was really fun and made me a little bit nostalgic. As someone who played make believe a lot growing up, I had a smile on my face reading this. I also would have liked to have seen a stronger distinction between what was happening in the real world and this transition to this alien war. I also thought that might have been an interesting opportunity to maybe increase the tension a little bit. I did think that I really enjoyed this, would have liked to have seen just a bit more rising action like leading up to that. I know this was a short story, but I think just something punching that up a little bit would have created some nice like a stronger distinction between the beginning and the end, and that ending would have had that nice conclusion. And I actually thought it might have been interesting to see, like, what if we left that uncertainty, like, wait, is this real or not? If there was something like a beat that was like, here we go, we're upping the ante. And I know this is a story about a child playing make-believe, but I think there's a way to approach that. I'd love to see another, draft of this with a little more polish. It was really fun, and I think it could, just evolve and go places.
Yeah, and again, I think, have you guys read my notes? I have pretty much a very similar sentiment. I don't know if either of you have read much Calvin and Hobbes, but I was getting major Calvin and Hobbes vibes from this, and that is not a bad thing, at least for me. So for me, like, the note that I have is, it doesn't have to be really real for it to be real. Like, I would have I was on board for this to be like fleshed out, colored out more. Like, once we start getting into like these spaceman spiff hijinks, like, just go for it. It resonated with me very personally too. And like, there's also that beginning piece of like wanting to be with your family a little, but really enjoying it when you don't have to be with your family, and like kind of running away and doing your own thing. Like, I was so on board for pretty much all of this. The story really resonated with me. I did enjoy reading it. I loved just, I loved the absurdity and the imaginative quality of it. So it worked for me. It was a good story. So yeah, I'm happy. Okay, that will then take us to Black Sunflower, and Beezus, you're going to get us started on Black Sunflower, if you dare.
All the ones I can't describe. This was an interesting story. I wish I could explain more than that what happened. I don't have a strong summary, and I went back to this earlier once I saw I was going to have to do this to try and see if I could sum that up, and I really can't. Once again, I really had a hard time following this narrative. So I'm not quite sure what happened. I know we have a character whose mouth either literally or metaphorically was sewn shut, which was a strong image to start with, but I wasn't sure where we were going.
Yeah. Who's second on this one? I think it's you, QPQ, is it?
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay.
So I've tried reading this quite a few times to understand it, and I don't want to imply that I don't want to imply in any way that there were not aspects of the story that I did not enjoy, because I think that there is some very nice imagery. I think that the worm mouth and all of these little sentences about sort of white waves and phosphorescence and things like that really have this really splendid cadence to them. Like, again, on a sentence level, there's a lot that's very strong here. Where I think this falters a little bit is it comes into the I think the fantasy writer problem of not providing the reader a foothold, so that I don't know which way is up and which way is down. I think that when you're writing a piece like this in this sort of imagined world, you need to either be extremely explicit about what literally is happening, or you need to provide some real thing for the reader to use as their ground. Like, oh, this is north in this story, and this is how I orient myself relative to everything else that's happening. But oh yeah, sorry, Beezus, you were going to say something.
Oh, I didn't want to interrupt you, but you're capturing what I've been feeling and haven't been able to articulate so well, that it's sort of like an aha moment just happened. To your point, I think that's exactly why I wasn't quite sure it was happening. And when we would get dialogue, it was sort of like I came up for air and I was like, okay, tell me more. I'd like to hear these characters speak more. This is pulling me back in. And there's some really evocative pieces of prose here, but I think each line was so, the language is interesting. I think it just needed to alternate a little bit more with grounding sentences and then more colorful sentences. I think that would have helped, like you said, QPQ, give the reader a foothold. It was just, there was a lot of illustration throughout, and I just needed a little more foundation.
Yeah, for echoing this, I agree with both of you in the sentiment of like, where I got most anchored into this was the back and forth between these two, just like the worm eating this person alive. And like, there's like this strong visceral stuff that is actually happening, or at least it seems like it's happening. And that sort of led me to believe that whenever it sort of goes off, it feels very hallucinatory and almost at times like epic and biblical in this sort of weird kind of way. Which I don't hate, I kind of like, but it just did indeed kind of lose me as to like, why? Like, what is this bringing to it? It just sort of feels like a little vacation from whatever's going on here. And it's kind of nice and pretty in its own way, but then like, it has nothing to do with my real life. Like, I don't know what this did for me moving forward. So it was indeed a little challenging. And I would not have been enjoying the position that you were in, business of having to sort of encapsulate what this was. So yeah, it's tough. So a tougher story that did indeed have some pretty bits in it for sure. Okay, so I am up now for Maybe It Is, which was fun. Okay, so I'll just come out and say it. I'm a mental health therapist, and I work with traumatized teenagers that happen to appear in the story. I don't know if this author knows who I am. My guess is they do, and if this was a shot at pandering, I wasn't expecting that, but hey, that's fun. Otherwise, if it wasn't, and you were just telling the story, okay, that's fine. What I liked about the story was in the beginning, the back and forth between, and like the sort of weird ethereal conversation of the husband and wife, and the way that they're discussing the daughter, and this clueless father character that indeed, unfortunately, rings very true, of just like not really getting any of the problem of what he's done here. All of that really did play pretty fair, pretty correctly, read right to me. We get a little lost when the father's working with the daughter and they're like, pounding around over some Mickey D's, and I don't quite get what's happening there. And it feels like the dad's somehow earned a lot of good faith, and I guess just because he's provided the daughter therapy, which, okay, it's something, but it's not much. It doesn't really feel terribly earned. But overall, it was a very easy story to read, and I'm talking down on it a little more. Like, I definitely enjoyed it. But I'm being a little bit hard on the parts. So I'm like, this felt like it could have just been better. But it's by no means towards the bottom of the pile. This was a solid read through and through, especially the stuff and mostly like the back and forth between the husband and wife. So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
No, likewise. I thought this was very readable. And I think in my notes in the judge chat before we started was this seemed to me like a Thunderdome classic, and that it's kind of a mumblecore. It's a like, what are my notes here? I should actually have that. A mumblecore rumination on trauma told through the lens of a fantastical world, in this case with ghosts and magic. And that's fun. I don't want to undersell the story. I think that's nice. I think that's cute. I think there's a lot of neat things about this. I quite like the conversation with the at the start, but I do think that it gets a little muddled at some points, and I would have liked to. I think that it stretched itself out a little thin in places. There didn't seem to be at times to be a there. That said, it's sweet. Obviously, this person is an experienced writer, and I think this just needed sort of an extra pass to sort of tighten it up in places and to strengthen some of the underlying relationships.
I agree on all points, really. I think I generally enjoyed this story, and it was like adjacent to, I felt like, some genres that I really enjoy. So it was immediately on board with the premise of the ghost witch bomb, this conversation, which was, about a domestic, relationship with their daughter, but set against this backdrop of like, well, she's a ghost and she's smoking. This is happening through a mirror. I was like, this is absurd, and I love it. I think, to the point of when you enjoy a story like this, you just want the best for it. And I do think there were parts that could be tightened up. I thought the McDonald's conversation went a little bit long. I was like surprised afterward, because then I really wanted fast food and it was bordering on product placement. Not really. I thought it was fine, but there were just opportunities there that I think could have been retooled to better solidify a relationship between, daughter and father, or maybe introduce a different concept. I was interested in this world. I wanted to know a little bit more. Like, it's one thing to have a witch mom, but clearly dad also knew some things and was learning. So I feel like there was a door ajar somewhere to lore that I was interested in, which I think is a testament to the skill of the writer. But yeah, another pass with some editing. I think this, I'd love to read it again.
Cool. All right, moving on to The Mover, and I think QPQ, you're gonna take us home on this one, or start the journey, I guess.
I would love to, and this is a truck story, and I love my truck story, so I'll go with the description of this. So The Mover is a story about a man who is sort of trapped in a dead-end job as a trucker, moving objects back and forth. And he hates his life because he has a BA in Roman civilization. He has poor working conditions, shoddy equipment, unsympathetic bosses, all those classic stuff. And as he's moving this object, he gets stopped because there are people on the thing that he's moving, which turns out to be like a whole bluff, like a whole small town / house thing. And they go back and forth for a little while with the people who reside in Scott's Bluff sort of pleading him to, like, please don't take our home and have it repossessed from the state of Nebraska to Illinois in pursuit of debt collection. Please, stop. And he sort of thinks about it for a while and sort of thinks about Carthage and everything else, and tries to relate to his own personal experiences, and then ultimately at the end decides, what, let's stop, let's go play some putt, let's decompress for a bit. This is another story that I think, my sort of oblique and roundabout description aside, was quite well written. I think that I really enjoyed sort of the raging and the nastiness of the narrator, especially toward the beginning, where he's like screaming in his vehicle about sort of his life and everything else. And I am a sucker for these stories that take a sudden weird turn for the weird, especially, and this might have been my poor literacy or the lateness, but the reveal that he's not moving just normal equipment, but like a literal gosh darn mountain or whatever across state lines. The problems on my end sort of manifest when the other characters appear out. I understand that, the characters want to stop their mountain from being moved, but they seemed a little one note, and they're basically, from my perspective, seem to be repeating the same idea over and over with sort of a mild exasperation, which, again, I can understand, I suppose, in sort of in a realistic sense, but doesn't really move the story forward and doesn't provide the narrator much to do beyond sort of him and haw over the situation as it's happening. I also think the character's name's Aiken just seemed to be a little too easily won over or defeated by the situation, despite all the hardship that he's facing at the beginning and the ways that he's obviously sort of justified this life to himself at the beginning. So again, this is not a bad piece. I thought this was, again, really quite well written and a fairly strong entry. It's just that I think there were some areas that need to be tightened up and need to be improved, and hopefully, if you were writing this in a space longer than 2 hours, you would have the opportunity to do that.
Beezus, your thoughts?
I think well, first of all, this was one of my highest rated stories. I really enjoyed it. Again, I also love when something seemingly mundane all of a sudden takes a turn for the weird, but not like just mind-blowingly weird, just like uncanny. Like we've gone a little strange. I love that. I think the main character probably could have benefited from a more maybe just a little bit more evident fracture in his conviction, or at least conviction in the job, or acceptance of it, that might have helped sell the change of heart later. I really enjoyed the conversation with these people on the bluff, and the realization that we're moving a mountain. I think it was nicely hinted at earlier, like there was something a little off about this seemingly normal situation at first, but then it became clear this person was not just moving a bunch of gravel. This was something else. Anyone mentions putt-putt in a story, I just crack up. So that worked for me. And you mentioned it not once, but twice, and got me both times. I thought it worked. It was just silly enough, but like a normal silly. It's just, again, juxtaposing this kind of like normal thing, and but in this situation became strange, and I really enjoyed it. The language was strong. I think there were a couple parts of dialogue I would have liked to have seen tweaked earlier, but otherwise, I had few gripes.
I had a few gripes as well. Clearly a well-written tale, and I do indeed love just like, it's a relatively tired idea of like just someone relocating people who don't want to leave. But when you do it this way, well, I'm on board. Okay, I'll read this, and I like that. I like that it felt fresh for what it was. My issue, and I hate having an issue like this so much because it feels like, okay, but just like get over yourself or get over your hangups. But like okay, so I think I'm reading this correctly, that the mover did not move the mountain. Is that right? I think, like, let's play putt-putt implies that the mover's not going to do it, or did I miss that?
Yeah, they stopped and they were going to
Okay,
go
right,
play
that's what I
putt-putt.
thought. So like, here's the deal. Like, clearly this person is just a small cog in a machine. Is this really going to change anything, that like the driver had sort of a change of heart, or the mover rather had a change of heart? Like, no, the company's going to come and get what's theirs, and then all that shit's going to happen anyway. Like, to me, the outcome that I think I wanted was this person having a reckoning over having to do the bad thing. Like, they've clearly been doing all of this, no one's complained, and they've probably been ruining a lot of people's lives in the process of doing it. And he's not learning any lesson or realizing that that was all happening, or like has to begrudgingly still do this and upset all these people. No, he's just going to stop his truck and play mini golf. That's great. Like, I mean, so it felt kind of cheap-ish on the ending, but that is my one gripe. Everything else I really liked. Again, very well written, very well told. The conversation was fun, and it was just a fresh story on something that should have been relatively tired. So it worked for me in those other ways.
Yeah, and I think, just very quickly, because I know we got to move on, I think Beezus was right in just having the fracture there at the outset, to sort of make the change to putt-putt at the end a little more satisfying. Because if the change is not, oh, we're not going to move this mountain, but this is a change in the psyche or the perspective of the narrator, then I think that's something substantial, even if he's just a cog in the machine.
Yeah.
Hey, one broken cog can send the whole operation into chaos.
Oh my gosh, that's deep.
There you go. All right. Would you care to be our broken cog for last call, Beezus?
I'm so glad you asked, because this story, I've got this. This is a good old fashioned Western card table revenge story, complete with a shootout. At first, when I started this, I was like, here we go again, a poker story. But there's tension from the get-go, and the tension builds. If this was a Western through and through, we have our main character confronting Mr. Grifton, who I wanted to call Mr. Grifter, which I think might have been
kind of vacillated a bit throughout the story, so that's not your fault.
Okay, I didn't make that up, but I thought it was appropriate. There was something going on here. So there's this card game that escalates. We have our bluff worked in here, and eventually it culminates in a call out where our main character reveals that Mr. Grifter, henceforth known as Mr. Grifter, did he murder his whole family?
At least
I
his
think,
mother.
yeah, there was some killing. And so our protagonist had to kill him back. And that's it.
Yeah, look, so this is a standard, right? I mean, it's just a standard, and it's not hard to write a standard. It is hard to write a standard well. And this was at the top of the pile for me because that's exactly what it felt like. This felt like a well-written standard. I shouldn't have been surprised by what surprised me, but I was surprised by it. And I think in large part that happened because the poker scene when it was happening felt like the scene. That's what it felt like the action was going to be about. And I was super disappointed when it ended as it did, which is I imagined exactly how the author wanted me to feel. And then I was so ready for like the actual turn to come that when it did, I got all the catharsis that I think the author wanted me to feel. So the author just had me in their hands. They were playing me like a fiddle. The story really, really worked for me. And it's funny, like I was expecting when I dropped this prompt to get a lot more poker stories, when in fact we didn't get that many. Like, but
Nope.
there are a lot of poker stories already in existence, of course, but most people went with the cliffside approach to bluff or something else. And this was it was a Western card game, but it worked. To me, it was very functional, and it just sort of had me from start to finish. So well done, whoever you are.
Yeah, I will echo the comments that have been made by my other two wonderful judges that this was very much fit into a standard mold or standard. I slowly lose my words as the night goes on. It's a very traditional Western narrative, right down to the shootout at the end. I think where this lost me just a little bit is I have close to zero interest in card games, and this is an entirely quo pro quid issue. But the large parts of the intro just did not interest me that much, and I think it's telling, at least in my experience, this might just be my limited experience, that stories about gambling or stories about cards are really about the card games themselves. They're often just sort of a vehicle for something else. And I think you do that to some extent here, but I think that the card aspects go on a little too long and just drag the story down a little bit for me. But as has been said, I think this is otherwise, it's a nice traditional story.
That is fair. And to see it a little bit to your point, I am inherently interested in poker stories because I am a degenerate gambler at heart. And I can tell you there are some issues with the actual telling of that story too. If you notice at the beginning, both characters are sitting to the person's right. It was a typo, but it messed up the topography of the whole table and it was a little strange. And also, why do we need these other people at the table? Heads up poker is perfectly serviceable for this. And in fact, I think it would have been maybe a little bit better. Like there was some fat that could have been trimmed from the poker game for sure.
And see, I know nothing about poker, and I would never write a scene like this because I wouldn't know how to begin. But I think for me, and I don't really have a strong interest in it, so I was able to overlook that because I didn't even know it was wrong necessarily or understand like how it could have been. And I think for me, that made me want to credit the author even more because like I normally wouldn't care. I've seen this movie 1,000 times, but somehow, Chili, you made this point earlier, I was in and the tension came through. And I thought that was really quite remarkable for something that we knew where it was going. And yet we were still invested, or I was at least. So hats off.
Cool. And now I am up for A Character is Lost, which is, basically the bluff of the second prompt, just like that is the prompt, but okay, A Character is Lost. I struggled here, and a lot of the reason why was it just like everyone was so flippin' coy in this. They were so withholding and talking around all the things. And that's an okay place for the story to start, but it just kind of stays in that zone. And if you're gonna like tease me with like penguins secretly whispering to one another and planning something, like that's the story. Like, what is all this stuff? Like at the very end, there's some cool shit that happens. I'm like, well, why are we seeing like this penguin conspiracy happen and unfold? Like that was far more interesting to me. Yeah, there's this whole power struggle over being lost and people not really saying what they want to, but ultimately it was it felt a little frustrating to read. And I get that I think all of these characters kind of felt frustrated, so that might have been intentional, but at the end of the day, it's still frustrating to read and you don't want to frustrate the reader. That's kind of how I felt overall. But we have here, it's like an Antarctic expedition of some kind with scientists and whatnot. And at its core, I'm primed to like that kind of a story, but it was tougher for me to sort of buy in here.
Yeah, I think I'll agree with a large parts of that. I think this is, I think on a sense level, it's clear what's happening. You know, all these people are sort of frustrated and they're arguing with each other. We do start a little bit in media res, I guess, in that, you know, they're already lost and they're already frustrated and they're out trying to figure out what happens, what's going to happen with these penguins and everything else. The feeling of this, and maybe this is just because I've been taking improv classes, but it felt a lot like a improv scene where like there's no straight man and the characters get stuck because
everybody wants to be crazy.
Yeah. So they're all sort of, you know, circling each other, trying to outdo one another for the wackiest, you know, for the wackiest and most, you know, out there person. But you really need that grounding in order to help the reader understand sort of what is the context, what are the stakes, how does the story move forward. I think that some of these issues could honestly be resolved just in going it through it a pass of edits, maybe reducing the number of characters just a little bit, but and just having someone act as the voice of reason so that we can have them characters to go, okay, you know, we've been arguing about this. Why don't we do X to resolve Y, and you know, move from there. Trying to see if there's anything else in my notes that I wanted to discuss. I felt, yeah, the only other thing, and again, I think that on a sense level, this is nice, and I think there is some nice piece of dialogue here, but the ending also seemed just sort of a little just added on at the very end. Just, I don't know if that was I need to end this piece or not, but it just seemed like we had this huge argument, and then all of a sudden days pass, and oh, we found the penguins after all. So that's my take.
Yeah, I'm generally in agreement with everybody. I think to your point, like with improv, a lot of improv is also saying yes and continuing things, whereas I think the first third of the story is a character making an accusation or scientists saying no, sometimes offering some kind of explanation or at least a fragment of one, because they don't really give them a chance or her a chance to actually explain what's happening. There are these like tidbits here, but we never are given a picture of what's going on. I think that is ultimately what prevented me from really buying into this, which is we start off, you say in media res, there's a point these characters are already trying to make. We as readers have nothing to go off of for this argument. So sort of based on how strongly they were arguing their point, I initially just didn't want to believe them at all. But I had nothing to go off of there other than the strength of the voices that the author was inserting here and the number of them. So I think a little bit more of a setup of what was happening, get your reader on equal footing, or at least some sort of footing, I think would have helped. And I am in complete agreement with the ending. It felt like maybe the author just realized they needed to end the story. And I actually like this introduction, that there was something magical about the penguins. And Chili, to your point, I wanted more of that. I think that would have been interesting to introduce earlier or allude to earlier, or tie that in so the ending felt more connected to the rest of the story. And I think probably would have given the reader a stronger case for picking a side.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, and in direct response to a character is lost, we have a rebuttal. Nothing is ever truly lost. QPQ, why don't you give us the lowdown on this yarn?
You know, it never truly is. So this is a story that takes place almost entirely in the head of a character as they are struggling. They're in the process of dying after, I believe, they have fallen down a ravine on an alien planet somewhere or something to that effect. The story that they're thinking about is the story of their father's meeting. And we get this really lovely meet cute in which, one dad notices the other dad's watch, and they, make a cute little story, and the watch gets stolen. And the one dad, Pop, goes and becomes like a vigilante to try to recover the watch. And then we sort of cut back to the scene of the person in the, in peril, sort of being lit by the smoldering glow of a dying red star, deciding that, well, the odds are stacked against me, but because of this memory that I have, this experience that I have, I know that some things are never truly lost, and I can still try hard to get out of this situation. I think there's some interesting ideas here. I think that the central story of the two dads, or I shouldn't say two dads. I think the central. Sorry, go ahead.
So it was a dad and his father. So I thought it was two generations.
Was it?
Was it?
I thought the character referred to their two fathers as Dad and Pop, and that was the.
I took it as a gay partner.
Oh,
That's how
okay.
I read it. Yeah.
Yeah, and he talks because it's confusing to say my two dads. So you say, you have dad and you have Pop as your two different names. Anyways, I don't know why I'm getting into detail on this.
No, that's fair. That's me inserting my grandfather we called Pop. So I immediately went there. Oops.
No, this is an important lesson about sort of the experiences that the reader brings to a story.
Mhm.
Anywho, I thought that the central aspect of the story about the gay relationship could have honestly been this whole story, and that without further expansion of the framing device, that it really should have been the focus. This is a very telly story in many ways. Like, we get this like paragraph by paragraph description of how things happen without actually seeing much of it. We don't get obviously any dialogue, or I guess we get a little bit of dialogue, but it's very condensed down. And I think that in a stronger piece, I probably would have, expanded this out a little more, done a little more characterization of the fathers. The vigilante turn is a little strange, and that might just be me speaking to that, or my own perspective, but maybe establish some fissures in the relationship from the get-go in order to make that turn make sense. And I don't want to come down completely hard against sort of this framing device of this alien world, because honestly, this is not that intrusive. It's just something that sort of stuck out to me as I was reading it. But maybe if you do that, you provide a little more detail or context to try to interweave these two stories just a little bit more. Was that coherent? I don't know. Let's see.
I got you.
No, I follow. And thank you for clarifying, because I had a note earlier that was explaining my confusion, because my initial impression with the story was this resonates like a story, the watch. This has to do with a romantic couple. I was like, then why toward the end is it this relationship? I'm like, well,
if you're reading it as a
it.
grandfather and a father, suddenly this becomes the Christopher Walken
like,
story from Pulp Fiction. That's what this is, right?
I was like, I was getting different vibes in the beginning, but now this makes sense. I really liked this story of the watch and this picture the narrator paints of their dads, and what this watch kind of means in their relationship and the evolution of what happens when something is lost but isn't necessary. Well, in a family where you never believe, or where you believe that nothing is ever truly lost, which was a line that stuck with me. And I thought was a good cornerstone for this idea. I think my takeaway is maybe not tangential to QPQ. I think I agree with you, but maybe the first thing that came to mind for me was just a little bit of an aside, which is I liked this framing of this lost in space. these two present problems that were kind of the bookends for the story. But then the vigilante introduction at the end of the watch story, I was sort of like, I feel like there are two different directions we could go into. And I think if we're going to continue to have this lost in space frame exist, building that out maybe a little bit more, or draw out a stronger conclusion, or drop that entirely and explore this vigilante angle. I think both are viable. I think there's a lot you could do there, and both are interesting. It's just a matter of what the author, envisions. I do think there needs to be some kind of tightening of one, or dropping one or the other. Because I think they're just spread a little bit too thin, both of those devices.
Sorry, my toddler just got up and okay, she's back down. Okay, sorry. I was rolling my eyes there because you kind of took all of the words right out of my mouth, and I hate when that happens, but I'm pretty much right there with you. I loved the first cutaway, and I'm like, oh, cool, we're gonna get back to this real soon, and then we don't for a while. And I'm like, okay, we don't need this, because the whole concept of like, what is this father's quest of like trying to find this watch? What's going on here? I became very interested in that idea. Clearly the watch didn't seem to be recovered. At least it didn't seem like it. And clearly this person's not going to make it, it seems. It's a dire situation. But the concept of like nothing ever truly being lost, it seems like everybody else got over the idea that the watch didn't really matter. We have this relationship. So I like the idea of someone going on that journey to try to recover something and coming to terms with the fact that like this item is just, it's just like a little thing. It doesn't matter. What matters is this. And that story inherently felt more interesting. And I don't think we need the frame story at all. Again, as you exactly said, either double down on that or just get rid of it. Because as it is, it's neither here nor there. And I think, just focusing on the meat, which, as we all seem to think, like the story of like what happens after that meet cute is the good stuff here. And I would have liked to have seen more of the good stuff.
Another thing, just sorry, real quick. Another strategy you could have taken is just intersped, have interspersed. That's the word. The Lost in Space with the two dads, and
I think
have
we were
it go
both
back.
like if we could cut back and forth, sure. Like
weaving those together.
That would have been cool, but really tough to do. Maybe really tough to do, especially in the time. So given that, like maybe stick with one thing that you can do well. But yeah, if you had the benefit of more time and some more time to really think about it, going back and forth too, especially is a pretty good choice. Yeah. I don't know how to pronounce this one, so luckily I don't have to. Beezus, what's the next story?
I've been pronouncing this Rakiura.
Cool. That sounds as good as anything.
I apologize if that's incorrect. I did not Google it before we started this. This is a story of a person who is disconnecting from the pressures of their job, their technological life, and venturing out on a ferry to embark on this hike. This hike of what I kind of imparted was self-discovery and disconnection to connect with oneself. I think that's all I would say about it. I enjoyed the story. My enjoyment stems from the really nice flow of the prose, a very, I thought, pretty clear introduction of who this person is, and I think maybe I just found them relatable. Because I wanted to turn off my phone and go into the woods 24/7 and come back when I feel like it. And I think I get that vibe pretty strongly from this. There's some good like natural imagery. I think there's some really strong use of senses here that I think maybe help ground me in it. I think what I wanted was maybe over the last couple of months, I have grown less secure that I understand what the word vignette means, but I'm pretty sure this is a vignette, and teetered on not as, for me, I didn't have a strong sense of a story. It kind of, and that might have just been maybe my wanting more from the ending. I'm going to use the Studio Ghibli vibes comparison again, because I think that was, I enjoyed this journey, but then it didn't really have a strong end for me or a strong takeaway. I wasn't sure what the author wanted me to walk away with. But it didn't detract from me enjoying it. It just kind of left me wanting more.
That's a fair take, and I'm supposed to be next up on this, but QPQ, you scored this pretty high and higher than I did. I think I'd rather, instead of stepping on your take, let you go next on this one.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
No problem.
I really quite enjoyed this piece. I think it's very well written, especially on the constraints of the 2 hours. This is obviously a very experienced writer. I have my suspicions, but I thought this was quite and I hate the word timely, but I thought it was timely in the sense that it's something that I think a lot of people can relate to, sort of as we are in the pandemic, where people are extremely burned out. They're looking for an escape. A lot of people are just sort of attached to their phones or the emails or whatever, unable to sort of disconnect from work life. And this notion of this woman who is like, goes on this trip out into this island south of New Zealand, Aorta, or what, I don't know how to pronounce it, really struck me as sort of this move of desperation to sort of reclaim some aspect of their life. And, they do all these things that you're supposed to do when you're supposed to disconnect, and then ultimately decide, I can do my own thing. I can just sort of relax. I don't have to like torture myself in the course of trying to reclaim some semblance of sanity. There's this quite nice description about rain turning a sandwich to mush and the cold wind, and the person realizing like, why am I doing this? Why am I shouldn't I just like go back to my hotel room and like chill out for like 5 minutes? Which again, I thought was hashtag relatable. And to me, the narrative journey here seemed to be more about the character's own sort of understanding of the needs to put up barriers in terms of sort of their work life and their personal life, and that they don't need to like be so connected all the time, and that they can, take time for themselves and do the things they want to do, and not just what is expected of them. So that was a bit of meandering, but just in short, I thought I really enjoyed the internal monologue. I thought there was really good characterization, and I thought it was a very well written and cozy piece. It's a little slight, I think, as Bees has pointed out, just in terms of almost being a vignette. But I thought that the arc of the character, to the extent that it exists, was well handled.
I have to say, cozy is the perfect word. Sorry,
no problem.
And it encapsulated that perfectly. When I say I want more of it, for me, that's kind of a compliment, because I thought just the language of the story was so strong, and it really was evocative of QPQ, like what you said, these feelings that a lot of us find extremely relatable right now. And I'm willing to concede that this is personal preference, that I just was, want something different. I can't even really articulate what exactly that would be. And I think this is one of those pieces that I think will elicit very different, or not different, but I think you're going to feel something when you read this, regardless of who you are. And I think that's, again, just evidence of a skilled writer.
Yeah. I've got really nothing but good to say about this myself. First off, just a very sensual story. It did bring me in, probably more so than many others this week, of like just how it felt to be in this story and how it felt to move through the story. Really appreciated that. And I think the overall message, and this is definitely felt like a story that kind of had a message, it's almost like a virtue of, here's all the things that we all kind of expect that you're supposed to do to feel better. And that's all great. So go ahead and try to do those things. But at the end of the day, your own self-care is not a science. It is what you define for yourself. And when I started reading the story, I just kind of assumed, oh, here's all the stuff, and character's going to go have their kind of spiritual whatever. And it ends up that what they really did was just sort of self-determine what works for them, not shame themselves for it. And this is kind of, I think I had a soft spot for this story because like, I hope my clients can talk to me like this about like stories that they've had about their own personal growth. So I really appreciated it. I appreciated the understanding of it. It didn't fail to surprise me, and it did bring me very much securely into the world and made me feel like I kind of knew exactly what this character was doing. So I did indeed enjoy it quite a bit. It worked for me. All right. Anything else before we move on to our last one?
Nope.
Okay, so our last one, which of course gets the benefit of very tired eyes, so apologies to the author of this piece, was Resistance, which I thought was fine and pretty serviceable. I guess I struggled at times, kind of hoping that the dynamic between these two people would be juxtaposed a bit more clearly by like the broader political thing that was going on clearly, that it feels really important to the cause. Kind of just feels like a backdrop, like this really kind of could have been happening anywhere. So that was I don't know, I think it's hard to weave those kinds of things together, especially given the time, but that's what I wanted because it was bothered to be set on a pretty big and important thing. And I just didn't see that quite as much. Also, I mean, I can't be alone on this. We need quotations. Like this was hard to read, especially considering it was like the last thing. Like you gotta, I get that it sort of was meant to be kind of from this one person's perspective, but like dialogue needs to be dialogue. Like you can break the rules. This was not, I didn't feel like an artistic choice or one with much merit, but like, especially again, the last story, go easy on us. We got to have some, as they say, inverted commas around these things, because it's just hard to parse a lot of what's going on here, especially a story that's largely based upon two people talking. So a little bit tough to kind of get through in that regard.
Yeah. When I originally read the story, I gave it quite a high score in my own little categorization scheme. And then as I reread it, I slowly sort of lowered it a little bit. What I think struck out to me initially was just some of the specificity around sort of protests and the kind of people who participate in protests, and the ways that those dynamics work. There's this artist called, I think, is it Jenny Holzer, who's like this conceptual artist that has this piece called Lack of Charisma is a Death Sentence, which I think connects quite a bit to this idea of this extremely attractive camera-ready face who becomes the face of the movement, whereas, the less pristine, less like traditionally, I don't know, less traditionally attractive individuals are sort of shunted off to the side. So I thought that there were elements like that I thought were really quite interesting, and I thought there was some very interesting ideas behind that. What I was less put off by the lack of quotation marks, and more just sort of generally confused of those aspects of the story that took place outside the confines of the protest or the protest scene. In particular, there's a point in the story where the narrator installs a keylogger on the other character's phone, and I'm sure that there is a reason behind this, but I unfortunately don't understand, just like in the context of the story. And it provides this really nice paragraph about what this person is doing when they're not contacting this other person, the narrator. But it's just, I don't entirely understand what is happening here. Likewise, I don't understand what is happening at the conclusion, where the narrator, who I believe's name's Alex, tells Camilla, who is this attractive woman who's leading the protest, that her name is not Alex, and they smile and they cup hands. And this could again be my illiteracy or the fact that it's extremely late, but I really didn't understand what's happening here. So my too long didn't read version, and I'm sorry I've talked very long about the story. There's aspects of this that I love, and as someone who's participated in the Black Lives Matter protests, I thought really spoke true, but it's like I didn't have enough connective tissue to make sense of the other aspects.
Yeah, I agree with Q, or I had a similar reaction to QPQ to the absence of quotations. I did assume it was a stylistic choice. I would have preferred quotations, but at least appreciated that the author committed to it. So I was able to get through it. But yeah, there was enough dialogue where it did make getting through it a little difficult at times. I thought I'm hung up on the keylogger part because while I thought the author did an excellent job of creating this picture and those specifics really, I think, just solidified this place and what was happening in this person. Those relationships became really clear. I understood the dynamic very clearly due to that, except for when it came to what Alex was doing. And there was a sense of unease from that I found picked up about a third into the story that persisted. And maybe that's because as a woman, the idea of someone keylogging my phone petrifies me. And I immediately assume there are terrible intentions behind that. And I think the lack of answers throughout there just kept that level of unease pretty constant. And this is one of those, we've talked about stories where questions are raised and we're okay when they're not answered. This is one where I think it would have benefited from answering a little, or at least providing a little bit more information as to what this dynamic was between these people, or what the intention was, even if it wasn't explicit, just something, because I wasn't sure what the goal was. Was this person trying to maybe uncover something that would have shown that Camilla wasn't who she was presenting herself to be, or was it something more insidious? And I think those are two very different things. And again, I'm so sorry, this was the last story I've read. It was kind of late for me. Maybe that's also my reading comprehension. But I was left with two very different possibilities and needed kind of a little more guidance. It might not have been either of those two, but I needed a little bit more from the author to kind of point me toward what I was supposed to be feeling about this dynamic. Does that make any sense?
It does.
Yeah, no. And I don't want to speak too long, but I had similar sense. I wasn't sure if the keylogger was supposed to be a malicious act on the narrator's part, or if it was supposed to be like uncovering this fraud, quote unquote, within the movement, who is, looks nice, but is not actually who they present themselves to be.
Yeah, seems reasonable. So real quick, let's sort of kind of come to a consensus and a judgment on this. So I know that's easier said than done, but let's sort of put a bow on it. So I made a little column for distinctions. I'm going to say just go ahead and mark off which ones you pick your top 5, I guess, that you would like to sort of award things to, and we will sort of take it from there. You can just go by your numbers or to go by whatever feels strongest to you, but just we'll do that, and then we'll see kind of where we're at.
It's going to be a very exciting audio experience.
Yeah, well, we're moving through this part of it quickly.
Please enjoy the sound of my mechanical keyboard. You probably can't hear it.
Click, click, click. That's the sound of your mechanical keyboard.
Thank you. You sound better than my mechanical keyboard.
Oh.
Okay. It's like we are just about done. I think we have some consensus brewing, which is good. Meanwhile,
wow.
I'm going to use this as an opportunity again to thank everyone for participating and remind you that Thunderdome is indeed a great place to further hone your craft. If you're at all interested in writing, go ahead and head over there, because it is a great place with a great community. You'll get feedback and you will grow as a writer if you do indeed go over there. But if you do nothing else, consider it a major accomplishment that you sat down, and wrote a story from scratch in 2 hours. That is not an easy thing. I've never gotten the chance to do this myself, as I've only run these contests and never actually participated in them. So just again, congratulations on making it this far. I don't know if anyone's going to listen to all of this. Hopefully you went in and found your story somewhere. But apart from that, well done just sort of being here and jumping into a contest like this. Beezus, if you're good with just sort of selecting those 3 for now, that works.
Okay, I'm going to do that.
Okay, that's fair. We will sort of take that into consideration. So here's the deal. I'm very happy with doing this one of 2 ways. We can either each pick our favorite and make sure that it gets a distinction, because I think we did have different favorites, or we can go based on like, where the most consensus is. What do you guys think?
Well, it looks like as of now, we have one with consensus across the board. I'd be interested to hear about everybody's favorite.
Yeah, so the one that I had the highest was Last Call, which again was that poker story sort of done right. That's mine. That's my sort of personal one that I like the most.
My favorite was Recura, or however you pronounce this. Again, my apologies, for its cozy, I don't know, cottagecore aesthetic, I suppose.
I think my favorite was, well, I know my favorite was We Will Not Be Okay, for its Western premise that took a swan dive into the weird in a way that I thoroughly enjoyed and was able to follow mostly.
Okay, so do we want to just go that way? I'm pretty cool with it. And we can either do that or just sort of go to consensus. And if we do it that way, I think we do need to do a first, second, and third. So do we want to pick our favorites and then sort of quickly debate as to which way they get sort of ranked? I don't much care as long as the story that I like the most gets that distinction if we do it that way.
Yeah, I just want to be sensitive to, I realize my pick, I think the scores skew a little bit. I think I'm the outlier there with how high mine was. So I also don't want to, throw a wrench in anything by like this one, if anyone strongly disagrees.
Okay.
I mean, sorry, go ahead, Chili.
No, I don't. I mean, none of the stories, none of us had like strong opinions in the positive while the other people were negative. So that's fine by me.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see then. So are we going with We Will Not Be Okay, Last Call, and Recura as our top 3?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's where the most consensus is, yeah.
Okay, so we have these. I'm going to put them down here.
I have to call out The Mover. I'm sorry. I'm looking at, I think that's the only story we all gave a distinction.
That's true.
That is
I
true.
was reading the wrong row.
That's okay.
Okay.
Took me until right now to realize this had happened.
I'm glad one of us is looking at the sheet.
I can't read, but I can look at a Google sheet.
Okay, sorry, I'm just juggling a couple of things over here. So yeah, I don't know. How do we want to handle that?
I mean, I think we can handle, sorry, go ahead. I think we can handle this one or 2 ways. One, we can do the one with the most consensus, which in this case would be The Mover. I don't think it's anyone's top story. Or we could try to rank the stories that we've selected out amongst ourselves. Ultimately, I'm okay with pretty much any. I think the pieces that we've selected out are all very strong. I have my preference, but I think anyone would, be a strong pick.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'm stuck on this one.
This is tough.
I
really did enjoy The Mover. I just feel so strongly about We Will Not Be Okay.
That's cool by me. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and have I think since it wasn't any of our favorites, The Mover is going to tie for third with one other story. because this was a nice little run and I'm happy enough with that. So we're going to have the mover in third. And then let's see, between them, let's just go with the most sort of consensus. It seems like Raycura had the highest. I think I kind of like that as first, with Last Call in second, and We Will Not Be Okay in third. Does that work for us? And now we have We Will Not Be Okay and The Mover both in third.
That sounds good to me.
I have
Cool.
no objections. That sounds like a splendid list.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
Okay, well, I hate to be terse about this, but it is 3 a.m. and I'm fairly certain my wife is not very happy with me right now. So I'm going to end this because tomorrow's a family day. And thank you all for participating as judges. Thank the entrants too for hanging in there. I know it's very late, so I don't know who's going to be seeing this as it's released, but thank you again for all being here. All right, so I'm going to end the meeting here, guys. So I'll thank you again personally in Discord, but this way we can start processing the video. Okay.
Not a
Sounds
problem.
good.
Thanks,
Thank
Chili,
you.
for
Guys.
hosting.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Bye.